I want you to picture a scene for a second. It's incredibly vivid and sweltering, and honestly, if you squint, it almost looks romantic.
Right.
So the year is 1987. We're in the Soviet Union. But we're not looking at the Red Square parade version. We are on the fringes.
The outskirts of a city where the concrete is kind of just crumbling into weeds.
Exactly. There's this highway stretching out toward a horizon where the sun is just starting to dip. It's turning everything to sort of bruised purple color. And walking down the side of this highway is a young woman.
And beside her is a horse.
A massive flaxen chestnut horse. Now, to a casual observer just driving by in a Lada, it looks totally peaceful. A girl and her horse taking an evening stroll into the sunset. But we know better because we have the map.
We do. And the map says they aren't going to a pasture. They aren't going to a new stable.
No, they're walking to the meat processing plant, the slaughterhouse. And the part that really sticks with me, the part that makes this image so incredibly hard to shake, is that the horse doesn't know.
He has no idea.
He actually thinks he's going on an adventure.
Yeah.
He's happy.
That tension right there between the peaceful visual of the sunset and the just industrial grimness of the destination is really the heartbeat of what we're discussing today.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just a story about a horse. It's a story about a specific moment in time when an entire civilization was walking toward a cliff, and most people were still trying to pretend the ground was solid.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a short story called Walking into the Sun, or in the original Russian, it's Iduji na Solnce, or Indo para o Sol for the Portuguese speakers out there.
And that trilingual distinction is super crucial for us to establish right away. We aren't just looking at some dusty Soviet archive pulled out of a basement.
Right.
We are looking at a very specific source text. It's a special trilingual edition published in 2026, so just this year, by the author Margarita Sharapova.
And before we even get into the plot, which I have to warn you is absolutely going to wreck you, we really have to talk about the first thing I saw when I opened the file.
The disclaimer.
Yes, the disclaimer. It wasn't the title or the dedication. It was a stamp on the copyright page that literally said, "This book was written by the author without the use of AI."
Now that is fascinating. I mean, in 2026, that's becoming quite the statement, isn't it?
It felt almost defensive to me, or maybe defiant is the better word. Like, why put that stamp front and center? Is it just a marketing gimmick for the organic crowd?
I really don't think it's marketing. I think it's a massive philosophical stake in the ground, especially for a story like this. If you think about what large language models do, they work on probability. They smooth things out.
Right, they give you the average output.
Exactly. They give you the average story of a horse or the statistically most likely description of a sunset. They hallucinate a reality based on broad patterns.
Whereas human memory is jagged.
Human memory has friction. It remembers the specific ugly details that completely defy the pattern. This entire story is obsessed with memory, specifically the profound fear of being forgotten.
So by putting that no AI stamp there, she's making a point.
She's saying this is testimony? I didn't prompt a machine to hallucinate a horse. I actually saw this horse. I smelled him. I felt the coarse rope in my hand. It elevates the text from a mere story into a human witness statement.
That makes total sense. It's basically the difference between a generic painting of a horse and a raw, unedited photograph of a horse with a very specific scar on its nose.
Precisely. And that brings us directly to the mission of this deep dive. We've got three really heavy themes to unpack today. First is memory, that desperate attempt to leave a mark on a world that actively wants to wash you away.
And second is mercy. Who actually has the power to give it, and the absolute tragedy of when it's taken aback.
And the third theme is time, specifically the year 1987. You really can't separate this horse from the year. The Soviet Union is teetering.
It's the end of an era.
Right, the stagnation era is ending, but the final collapse hasn't fully happened yet. Everything is old, everything is tired, and this horse solace is the perfect biological metaphor for a superpower that is rotting from the inside out.
And listener, I have to warn you right now, the ending of this story has a twist. But it's not a fun magic trick twist. It's a twist that feels like a massive victory for about 5 seconds, and then when you actually sit and think about it, you realize it might be the most tragic outcome possible.
It's a total gut punch. It forces you to question the very definition of what it means to save someone.
Okay, let's just get into it. Let's unpack this and meet our protagonist. His name is Solace?
Solace, a flaxen chestnut tranquener.
Yeah, I know you're the history buff here. When I read tranquener, I just thought, okay, fancy horse. But you were telling me earlier that Word is doing a ton of heavy lifting in this text.
That's doing an immense amount of heavy lifting. If you just see horse, you miss the core tragedy. The Trakehner is the oldest warm-blood breed in Germany.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, these were the horses of the East Prussian cavalry. They were selectively bred for stamina, for elegance, and for courage. They are essentially the aristocrats of the equine world.
So they definitely aren't plow horses. They are elite athletes.
Elite athletes with a very dark modern history. Look at what happened in 1945. As the Soviet army advanced into East Prussia, the Trakehner breed was practically decimated. They were evacuated across the frozen Vistula Lagoon in this horrific winter journey.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, thousands of them died falling through the ice. And the ones that actually survived were often captured by the Soviets as war booty. So to find a Trakehner in a rundown Soviet circus in 1987, this horse is a living ghost.
Wow.
He is a remnant of a conquered aristocracy, a relic of a completely destroyed world that has now been reduced to doing cheap tricks for the conquerors.
That adds a whole layer of melancholy that I completely missed on the first read. He's not just some old horse. He's a fallen prince.
Exactly. And he is a prince who has been physically ruined by his new life. The text is absolutely brutal about his condition.
Yeah, I actually have the list here. It reads like a medical chart for a disaster victim. He's 63 years old in human terms. The text clarifies that's about 15 in horse years.
Which is getting up there for a working animal.
Definitely. And the author notes his upper central incisors have rounded off completely, which is such a specific equestrian detail. But the injuries. Chronic bowed tendons in the hind legs. Shoulder slip.
Let's actually stop on those specific terms because this is where the no AI technicality really shines through. A bowed tendon isn't just a sore leg.
Right.
The tendon acts like a heavily tensioned cable made of thousands of individual fibers. When a horse is pushed way too hard, say, by doing gymnastics, he biomechanically isn't built for those fibers literally tear, they hemorrhage.
Ouch.
And then they heal with this massive scar tissue that bulges out looking like a bow. It's a career-ending injury. It means the entire suspension system of the leg is completely shot.
And what about the shoulder slip? The text uses a very weird word for it. Splake.
Splech. Now that is a deep cut of circus and veterinary terminology. It refers to a condition called Sweeney, which is suprascapular nerve damage.
So what does that actually do to the horse?
Basically, the muscles over the shoulder blade atrophy because the nerve feeding them is dead or damaged. The shoulder literally looks hollowed out. It destabilizes the horse's entire front end.
So you have a horse with absolutely no suspension in the back and a completely hollowed out, destabilized shoulder in the front.
Correct. Biomechanically, this horse is a total wreck. He shouldn't be walking, let alone performing. He is in constant low-level agony.
And yet, where does he live? Not in a veterinary hospital. He lives in a circus.
But not the circus of bright lights and sequins that we normally picture. We are in the backyard, the unremarkable, grimy underbelly.
The description of the setting is so visceral. The author describes the asphalt clod of the yard, the perpetual torpor of the stall. It feels incredibly stagnant, like the air itself isn't moving.
Stagnation is the absolute key word for the Soviet Union in the 1980s. The Zastoy. It was the era where nothing moved, nothing improved, and everything just slowly decayed. The stable here is a perfect microcosm of the entire country.
And ruling over this decaying little kingdom is our antagonist, a man named Okhovikov.
Okhovikov. And his title is important. He is the people's artist.
Which means what exactly in this context?
It means he is part of the nomenclature. He's the establishment. He's the director of the Russian Troika attraction. But here is the massive irony of his character. He is also 63, just like the horse in human terms.
So you have two old men, one human, one horse, both way past their prime. But the human completely refuses to accept it.
He is in deep delusional denial. Okhovikov is completely obsessed with recreating a somersault on the horse's croup. This is a trick from his youth. He desperately wants to be young again. He wants the glory days back.
But just think about the physics of that for a second. A full-grown adult man trying to do a backflip on the back of a horse with a hollow shoulder and severely bowed tendons. It's literally insane.
It's grotesque is what it is. It's a massive abuse of power. The source text actually tells us the trick worked somehow on Saturday, but hasn't worked for 2 days since. The horse is physically collapsing under the weight of this man's ego.
It's just the perfect image of leadership refusing to let go of power. Instead of retiring the horse with some shred of dignity, he forces it to break.
And because the horse breaks, because the horse can no longer support the physical illusion of the man's youth, the horse immediately becomes trash.
The decision is made so fast. Okhovikov orders the narrator, Margarita, to take Solace away. And the gatekeeper, this guy, Rudolfich, he just twists the knife, he sneers and asks for salami.
For salami. It's such a brutal reduction of a life. It takes this living creature, this Trakaner, with a rich history, with distinct personality, with fears, and turns him into a cheap, mass-produced snack.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate dehumanization, or I guess de-equinization. To the system represented by Okhovikov and the gatekeeper Solace is just expired inventory.
So Margarita, our narrator, she has to lead him away. She's the one actually holding the rope. But she's not exactly painted as a saint at the beginning, is she? I mean, she admits she doesn't even love him.
And that brutal honesty is exactly why I trust this narrator. She doesn't paint some fake Disney picture for us. She flat out says, I didn't love him. He was biting, he was nervous, he was snappy because of the sores, he wasn't a cuddly pet, he was a very difficult coworker.
But then she follows that up by saying, he loved me.
And that right there is the emotional hook of the whole piece. The unrequited, pure loyalty of the animal. He bit her, yes, but he also constantly looked for her. That creates a profound moral debt. She feels the heavy weight of that trust.
She knows she can't save his life, though.
Right.
The order has already been given.
Right, but she knows she can save him from the sheer terror of the transport truck. She can give him a merciful, quiet walk to the end. That's the one thing she controls.
So the journey begins. This brings us to part 2 of our breakdown. Illusion versus reality. They leave the circus yard. They head out toward the wasteland. And here is where the imagery gets incredibly vivid. You can practically feel the heat radiating off the pavement.
The sensory details in this section are suffocating. The heat is described as oppressive. The cruel evening horseflies are biting at them. And the sun isn't a friendly, warm ball of light here. It's a destination.
Hence the title, Walking into the Sun.
Exactly. It feels like they're walking directly into an incinerator. The horse is just a black paper cutout against the red sky.
But look at the horse's reaction. This is the part that kills me. The narrator is absolutely miserable. She's dejected. She knows she's literally walking him to his death. But Solace, he thinks he's won the lottery.
It's the tragedy of the disconnect. For Solace, this walk is freedom. Think about his daily life up to this point, standing in a dark, torpid stall, standing on hard asphalt, being ridden by an angry, heavy old man, and suddenly he's out. He's walking on grass.
The text explicitly says he is joyous.
He is.
There's a moment where the narrator looks at him, and she actually sees a physical transformation happen.
Yes. She notes that away from the vileness of the circus, his dull coat actually began to shine. His gnarled, ugly legs suddenly look slender again. The text says, as if hour by hour he were turning back into a young stallion.
Do you think that's real? Or is she just projecting her own guilt onto him?
I think it's probably a bit of both. But I genuinely think there is a biological truth to it, too. The circus deformed him mentally and physically. Just being out in nature restores a piece of his dignity. He holds his heavy head up. He prances a little bit. He becomes the aristocrat again.
Which honestly makes it so much worse. If he was just a miserable, broken bag of bones stumbling along, maybe it would be a tiny bit easier to let him go. But he becomes beautiful right before he's supposed to die.
It highlights the absolute waste of the system. The system broke him, but his spirit was still in there just waiting for a single patch of grass to wake it up.
The narrator has this really dark passing thought while they're walking. She thinks, what difference does it make if you have a headache if you're going to be killed right now anyway?
That is pure, unadulterated Soviet nihilism right there. Why bother with small comforts if the apocalypse is coming? Why fix the broken window if the whole building is actively collapsing?
But the beautiful thing is, she does bother. She stops. She lets him rest. She actually washes him with the cool water from the stream.
Because mercy isn't always about changing the outcome. It's about the moment. She knows she can't change the destination, but she can completely change the quality of the journey. That is the only real power she has left in this system.
Let's talk about that scene in the ravine. They stop at a stream to rest. The horse falls asleep right there in the water. For me, this is the lyrical centerpiece of the entire deep dive. Everything just slows down here.
It really does. The loud noise of the highway fades away. The chaotic noise of the circus is gone. It's just water stones and a sleeping old horse.
And the narrator does something very strange and very beautiful.
She starts playing with pebbles. She takes these dark pebbles and carefully arranges them on the light river bottom. And she spells out his name, S-A-U-L-I-S.
Why do you think she does that? She actually asks herself the exact same question. She wonders if the name will still be there in 10 years. But then she has this terrifying, profound realization. She admits to herself that she will probably forget him.
That internal admission is the bravest part of the entire book. We all love to tell ourselves, I will never forget you. But human memory is a sieve.
Yeah, she recalls a pony named Ruzulia who died years ago in Voroshilovgrad. At the time, she probably cried her eyes out. But now she remembers him calmly. The pain is gone. The specific, sharp details are fading.
It's entropy, isn't it? The universe wants to wash everything smooth. It wants to wash the name out of the riverbed, and it wants to wash the face out of your memory.
Right. Everything tends toward disorder and oblivion. So writing that name, Solace, in the heavy river stones is an act of total rebellion against that.
She knows the current will eventually move the stones. She knows her own neurons will eventually overwrite the memory. But for this one specific moment, she is physically inscribing his existence into the real world. She is demanding, saying, he was here. He had a name.
And while she is having this deep existential crisis, Solace is just sleeping in the cool water, dreaming. The author notes his ears are twitching.
And the text speculates on his dreams, which breaks my heart. Is he dreaming of green fields and open pastures? No. She wonders if he is dreaming of the applause, of Okovikov juggling burning torches on his back.
That is so deeply sad. He's literally dreaming of the job that killed him.
It just shows how incredibly deep the conditioning goes. His entire identity is wrapped up in the circus. Even in his deepest sleep he is performing, he literally doesn't know how to be a wild horse anymore.
So eventually they leave the stream. The little rebellion of the pebbles is left behind in the water. They get back up on the highway. The destination is getting closer now. The meat plant. The sun is setting. And then out of nowhere, a bicycle appears.
The encounter. This moment completely changes the genre of the story. We suddenly pivot from a bleak tragedy to a potential fairy tale. We meet the gypsies.
A young boy, raven-haired as the text says, rides up. He's got swagger. He smokes a cigarette butt. He's portrayed as totally outside the rigid Soviet system. And he looks at the horse.
And importantly, he doesn't see salami. He sees actual value.
He looks at her and asks, how much?
And the narrator, she does something wildly reckless for 1987. She says, free.
The boy completely doesn't believe her. He says, we're no thieves, lady. And you have to remember, in the 1987 Soviet Union, absolutely nothing is free. If it's free, it's either stolen or it's poisoned.
So she has to convince him. She actually hands over the official transit papers. She says, we're heading to the meat plant. She is basically putting the gun on the table right there. She is saying, I'm going to kill him in an hour unless you take him right now.
It's an act of pure desperation. But notice the massive shift in cultural values here.
Yeah.
The civilized institution, the state circus, wants to turn this noble horse into cheap meat. The gypsies, who the narrator even jokes about living in a camp, the outsiders, they are the ones who actually offer salvation.
It's a classic literary trope, but it works so perfectly here. The absolute margins of society are where true humanity still exists. The center is rotten to the core.
And then the father arrives, the older gypsy man. Listener, this moment, honestly, if you don't feel something here, you need to check your pulse. He runs up sweating, totally out of breath. And when he realizes the horse is actually his.
He doesn't check the horse's teeth to gauge his age. He doesn't look at the bowed tendons. He doesn't ask if the horse can do a somersault.
No, he hugs the horse.
He hugs him. The text says he sniffs the hide tremulously, and he says, haven't stroked a horse in 100 years. My joy.
My joy, not my asset, not my new tool or my prop, my joy.
That is the ultimate definition of mercy. It's unearned grace. The horse is instantly transformed from meat back into a beloved living creature. He isn't valued for what he can do, the tricks, the hard labor, but simply for what he is.
The narrator really feels it too. She hands over the papers completely. She says, what is a gypsy without a horse? She actively encourages him. She feels the massive weight lifting off her shoulders. She has saved Solace. She completely cheated the slaughterhouse, and she cheated Okovikov.
It's the perfect Hollywood ending, right? The horse goes to live out his days in the green fields. The narrator goes home with a clear conscience. The triumphant music swells.
It absolutely should be the ending.
But history and Margarita Sharapova are not that kind.
Here is where it gets really interesting and really incredibly dark. Just as the transaction is finished, just as the gypsy is literally crying tears of gratitude, a silver car appears down the highway.
A silver Volkswagen. Even the car itself is a heavy symbol. It's foreign, it's metallic, it's fast. It represents the sudden intrusion of modernity and authority.
And it's Okovikov, the antagonist, driving it. And he is bursting with excitement. He leans out the window. He's honking the horn. He looks genuinely happy.
And in this world, this is the most dangerous kind of happiness. What is his news? Why is he chasing them down the highway?
He yells that he did the somersault. He managed to do the trick back in the ring with another horse. Or maybe he forced it. The text is a little vague on exactly how, but the result is he shouts, "The act is restored."
Let's really pause here, because this is 1987. This is the era of perestroika. The Soviet leadership is trying desperately to prove that the old system can still work. Look, we can still do the somersault. We are still a global superpower.
So Okovikov is basically acting as a stand-in for Gorbachev here.
In a very real way, yes. He represents the leadership who genuinely believes that if we just push a little harder, if we just accelerate, scorny was the big buzzword back then, we can somehow make the broken old machine work again.
But the trick is a total lie. We know the horse is physically broken.
Exactly. Well, Kovikov yells out the window, "Get back! Heal him up a bit! Get on his back! Why are you crawling?" He honestly thinks he has found a solution. Heal him up a bit. As if you can magically heal a severely bowed tendon with a week of rest and some state-mandated optimism.
This is the massive moment of reversal. The narrator, she has the papers in her hand. She has the gypsy right there willing to take him. She could easily say, "No, he's gone. You sent him to die. I gave him away. He's free now."
But she doesn't.
She crumbles. Instantly, she physically takes the rope back from the gypsy. She hides the official papers. She falls right back in line and says, "Ali's Ali, Salyukom boy."
Why? That is the question that absolutely haunts me about this text. Why does she obey when freedom is right there?
It's the uniform, isn't it? It's the deeply ingrained habit of obedience. Olkovikov is the people's artist. He is the director. When the system commands you, you obey, even if the command is completely insane.
It's the terrifying power of the hierarchy. The dream of mercy was incredibly fragile, but the reality of the hierarchy is concrete. But the real tragedy here is highly specific. The good news, that the act is saved, is actually a deferred death sentence.
Right, because Olkovikov thinks he can use solace again.
And the narrator knows the stark truth. She says it right in her internal monologue. Tomorrow he won't pull off the salto mortal again, and I'll have to take the horse to the meat processing plant once more.
That is just devastating. The success didn't save the horse at all. It just violently stole his retirement.
It stole his one single chance at peace. If Olkovikov had failed, if the trick had completely collapsed in the ring, Solace would be a gypsy horse eating grass in a field fully loved. But simply because the trick quote-unquote worked, Solace has to go back to the hot asphalt, back to the extreme pain, only to be sent to the slaughterhouse in 3 days when his leg inevitably gives out again.
It totally flips the whole concept of success on its head. Sometimes success is literally the worst thing that can happen to you.
Especially in a fundamentally broken system. A success in a broken system just violently prolongs the agony. It keeps the machine grinding for one more day, consuming one more innocent life.
The final image of that scene is permanently seared into my brain. The older gypsy man is just left standing there in the middle of the field. The sun is finally dying. The young boy is riding tight little circles on his bike. And the narrator is walking away shouting back, "Come tomorrow," without fail.
Come tomorrow. It's such a desperate, hollow promise. She desperately wants to believe she can still fix it. Come back tomorrow. I'll give them to you then.
But do you think they'll come?
Honestly, I highly doubt it. The magic moment is gone. The gypsy knows it. The horse definitely knows it. Salas looks back and neighs. He calls out to them. He fully knows he's leaving his joy behind and walking straight back into his prison.
So let's zoom out a bit. We've been really deep in the emotional weeds of the story, but we need to look at the macro picture. The text mentions Soyuzgosirk explicitly.
Yes, it does. The Union of State Circuses, it was an absolute monolith, a massive, highly centralized bureaucracy that aggressively controlled every single circus in the USSR. The text explicitly states, the Russian Troika Act has fallen apart. The Soyuzgosirk system has mutated, the monolithic Soviet era collapsed.
So the author is practically grabbing us by the collar and telling us, this isn't just about a horse. It's about the total collapse of an entire world order.
Solace literally is the Soviet Union in this metaphor. Think about the stark parallels. He has this glorious historical past, the Traikenner, the revolution. He currently looks huge and powerful on the outside, but internally his core structure, his tendons, his economy, is completely snapped. He is only held together by remedy books and sheer denial.
And the good news that violently drags him back, that's the false hope of the late 80s.
Exactly. The forced reforms, the delusional idea that we can fix this. It gave everyone a tiny glimmer of hope, but really it just cruelly dragged out the inevitable collapse. The slaughterhouse was always waiting. The system was simply too fundamentally broken to be healed up a bit.
It's a very bleak reading. but it feels incredibly true to the text.
It's the harsh truth of 1987. It was a year of literal zombies walking into the sun.
I want to pivot back to the craft for a minute before we finish up, because we talked about that no AI stamp at the start. And throughout the reading, I kept tripping over these highly specific words.
The equestrian and circus terminology.
Yes. Currycomb, bradoon, croup, fetlock joints.
Spleck. You can't forget Spleck.
How could I possibly forget Spleck? Why is the author so intensely obsessed with this specific vocabulary?
Because language itself is a landscape that can be eroded and lost. If you don't actively write down the word Spleck or bradoon, those words literally die with the last generation of people who use them.
It goes right back to the pebbles in the stream, doesn't it?
It does perfectly. The precise words are the pebbles. Margarita Sharapova is an immigrant now. She's living in Lisbon writing this in 2026 across 3 different languages. She's looking back at a massive country that literally no longer exists, the USSR, and a gritty profession that has largely completely vanished, the Soviet circus groom. By using the precise, authentic terminology, she is preserving that lost world.
If an AI wrote this story, you'd probably just say the horse had a bad leg.
Right. It would say, she brushed the horse. But Sharapova explicitly says, I scrubbed the croup with a currycomb. The intense specificity is the proof of life. It's the rough texture of reality. And aggressively preserving that texture is the only way to fight the nothingness that inevitably follows death.
The author actually states in the text I am writing about him, Salas, an unremarkable circus horse of times gone by.
Unremarkable, that's the key word there. History books record the massive generals and the loud politicians. They record the Olkovikovs. They don't ever record the horses. But this specific book does.
So the physical book itself is the ultimate act of mercy. The narrator completely failed to save the horse back in 1987. But the author saved him in 2026 by writing this down.
That is a really beautiful way to put it. She couldn't save his physical body from the rendering plant, but she absolutely saved his name from oblivion. She finally finished spelling it out in the stream.
It really makes me wonder about the unremarkable things in our own modern lives. We all have a solace. Maybe it's a childhood pet, maybe it's a beat-up car. Maybe it's a quiet period of our lives that literally nobody else cares about.
And if we don't actively write it down, if we don't deliberately preserve the specific pebbles of that memory, it just disappears. The current is always flowing.
So as we wrap up today, we've gone from the stifling heat of that asphalt stable to the cool philosophical break at the stream, to the heartbreaking almost rescue with the gypsies, and finally right back to the silver Volkswagen.
It's an exhausting journey from stagnation to genuine hope and then violently back to a tragic false success.
The narrator shouted, "Come tomorrow to the gypsies." But we know history. The Soviet Union fell just a few years later. The entire circus system collapsed. People scattered to the winds.
They probably never came back. Or if they did, the circus was already moving on to the next town and Salas was long gone.
So listener, here's my question for you, and I really want you to sit with this today. In your own life, how often do you mistake a temporary reprieve for an actual solution? How often do you accept a success, like Okolvikov's forced somersault, that actually just firmly traps you back in a completely broken situation?
That is the hard question. Are we celebrating because we actually fixed the core problem, or simply because we found a clever way to ignore the bowed tendon for one more day?
And perhaps more importantly, when you are walking your own quiet, unremarkable path, what pebbles are you leaving in the stream? Who will remember your name when the current eventually picks up?
Because if you don't write it down yourself, with all the jagged, ugly human edges, no one else will.
Something to really mull over as you walk into your own sunset.
Indeed.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Good day.